Sadashiva Samarambam Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Ishvaro Guratmeti Uti Veda Vibhagine Vyomabda Vyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha Bhava Vedanta Sedanta Gocharam Tamagocharam Govindam Paramanandam Satguru Pranatoshmaham Om Om Shanti 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 Om. Namaste, welcome. We are beginning our fourth class on Vivekachudamani. Last week we did the verse, the third verse, the verse number 3, which was, it was a kind of intense verse for some of us. We had Vidya. Vidya is not with us today because she has a yoga studio, a yoga center, a big center in Spain, and today she had to work. So she's the one who asked me to begin this class. And she was under the impression that there would be a group of people with her, people from Surya Lila, which is her center. But after 1-2 class, most people quit it. And then she's kind of alone. And so we are keeping this group due to Lynn and Ruth that joined us. Otherwise it would probably have been difficult to keep it. So, but whenever there are 4 or 5 of us, I like to keep it rolling, keep it going. So we had this verse number 3 unfolded, and video was a little bit like nervous at a certain point because I say, oh my God, all this talk about spiritual suicidal, and if I really don't really go for it in this lifetime, it's like I'm killing myself spiritually, And then she brought up the question like, and how about that verse in the Gita that says that even small actions with the spirit of the Kama Yoga are going to give you great results because it's going to bring you a lot of merits, no? So I haven't had much time because we were closing. So she was talking about that, and I began explaining that once we understand the logical aspect of Kama Yoga, the how you say, the logical aspect of Kama Yoga, the science, no? And once we develop the spirit, the rational, once we understand the reason behind the rational aspect of Kama Yoga, and then the other 50% of Kama Yoga, let's say the other side of Kama Yoga, is to develop that Kama Yoga attitude, the Kama Yoga spirit. And the spirit of Kama Yoga, which is based on the knowledge first, and then one can develop the spirit, it makes it in a way that every action we do is not wasted because our goal is no longer the result of the actions, but our goal is to act in a certain manner, which is a way of acting with a spirit of gratitude and contribution. And when we do that, the action becomes fulfilling by itself in a way that we no longer depend on the results of the actions. So we are getting satisfaction, gratification, happiness, peace of mind, and so on, by doing certain actions, proper action with a proper attitude. So what it means? It means that there is no action that goes wasted. Every action is producing good results. Every action is producing great protection against suffering, right? Because we are just benefiting from the action, and we are no longer relying on the results. We have the understanding, therefore our actions are just designed to give me joy and pleasure. And the results later on can serve the purpose for me to learn some lessons, to understand a little bit better my relationship with Ishwara, the Lord, as the field of action. So I understand it better as I'm delivered the results of my own action. So I can enjoy the action by itself, and then I enjoy the learning I can gain from the results. Huh? So we are no longer tied up with the idea of wanting the results that we want, but we want to just contribute with a certain attitude, and we are happy to enjoy the lessons that life brings about to us. So that's why every action is good action, and it's not wasted. No, it's we are looking at this verse. We were looking from a different angle. It was say like a person who has all the qualification, has a good punya, a good karmic situation, a karmic momentum, but somehow start, sitting back and relax and no, let me enjoy my sattva, let me enjoy my punya. A person who does not take advantage of one's karma, and rather than push forward with, towards its goal, if the person sits back and start, falling back, and getting again entangled with the world of objects, and no longer strives for moksha as one's ultimate goal, and then that kind of individual in that kind of situation, he would be committing a kind of spiritual suicide. Any questions about that? And then we stopped when I was commenting on a few statements here. Everyone, even the most abundant pleasure seeker, unconsciously is trying to free himself from desire. It is the only way to be happy. The only way to be happy is to remove the desire, because the desire is the source of unhappiness, as we know. Desire is a declaration of limitation. It's a declaration, I am limited by not having what I want the way I want. And the moment that we declare that to the universe, to Ishvara, we will feel limited immediately. We say, like, I need certain things here in order to feel okay. But anyone, even the most abundant pleasure seeker, unconsciously, not consciously, that's the problem. We did not brought it under the light of consciousness. It's just subconscious mechanism. Unconscious is trying to free himself from desire, but he thinks that he's trying to get his objects or her objects of desire. But no, he's trying to remove this stressor. Once we realize and we see clearly and truly, we understand these mechanics, these facts, and then we are confronted with two possibilities. We can stop fooling ourselves, or we can continue fooling ourselves. Because as we heard several times, ignorance is bliss. If we don't know something, we are good to go. We are right there in the rat race and chasing things and running from things because we don't know any better. But once we know, and once we really examine the logic, and once we really decide and determine, no, this makes sense, and then if we look to the other side and we allow ignorance to continue to push us around, and then it is we will be fooling ourselves in spite of the knowledge. That's what this verse refers to as a spiritual suicide. Why would we wish to continue to fool ourselves? That means continue to pursue objects or pursue the happiness in objects, knowing that it cannot be found in any object. Why we do that? This is a good question. Why? I mean, the simple question is because these old habits, they became addictions. They are so powerful. They trick my mind. And when I see uh, I'm again making myself dependable on certain objects and just running around to try to accomplish them. It's old habit. We do that because we have a long history. We are addicted to. We have the habit of doing so. Because the whole world encourages us to do so. That's a big one. Oh, what is wrong with you? No. Why you are not out there going for happiness? Why you are not going to the pubs anymore, Lynn? Huh? Why we are not chasing, all these good objects in the world? There is something wrong with you. People here in Italy, they ask my wife again and again, so what Arlindo does? He almost never goes out and he's all the time home. What a boring life, So everybody does go for those chasing, this running to accomplish things and to feel some emotions and so on. So the whole world encourages us to do so. Everybody's going to tap us on the shoulders. Oh, great! You get it. You got it. You went and you accomplished it. So it's much easier to follow the crowd. But as we know, the crowd is never right. Why the crowd is never right? Because ignorance is widespread in samsara. It pervades the entire samsara. Everybody is being governed and operated by ignorance, and everybody is being pushed around by ignorance. And then we should never look at others and say, if they do, and then I should do. No, we should look and understand the real fact there is like, if everybody's doing this and this and this, it means I don't want to do it because I know that 99% of the people are driven by ignorance because this is law. But yet, there are many things that we wish we had the power to stop. A lot of those tendencies, propensities, habits, we would like to stop them. But some of these are not easy to be broken, and we need to be patient as well and know that application of knowledge gradually weakens up those tendencies. Every time we feed on some ignorance-based desire, so the desire gets a little bit more strong and powerful. It gets fed. And every time we confront and we just discard, we do not engage them. Okay, we reject them. So it becomes weaker. It's like me. If I don't eat much, I become skinnier and skinnier and weaker. So those desires, those vasanas, if we don't feed them, they become skinnier and weaker until they die. Okay. Sometimes we have a good spiritual punya karma momentum in our lives, but when we least expect, we get some crises or difficulties or some dramas or some tragedies happening now in one's life. Oh, most common is some serious illness. When we get older, we may start getting some more serious, more challenging illness. When something like that happens, and then we have some loss or some tragic event, and then our minds becomes rajasic and tamasic. If we are not really sticking to our sadhanas, our daily contemplation and study and application of the knowledge, if we are not really dedicated to our self-knowledge, it's possible that we begin making mistakes because our mind easily will get disturbed, and we're going to lose our clarity, our clarity of intention, the direction of our life. We're going to lose track of that, and then we may begin going a little bit off track, making mistakes, and then running into more and more mental disturbance and emotional confusion. So we have to always be careful, because we never know what life is bringing us. So ignorance is powerful. We need to understand that it's really powerful, and we need to keep alert and keep applying the antidote to ignorance to our minds, so that our mind is clear. Why I'm not being able? Okay. But if we understand the power of karma and free will, and yet we refuse to own up our power and take up this fight, it is as though we give up, as though we commit suicide. So now, when I was speaking, now you were seeing me bigger, or you were still seeing all those small squares?
I see you on the full screen, Arlindo.
Okay. Then I changed it. I like to change it that way now. Verse number 4, without self-knowledge, a person who studies the scriptures and practices rituals to propitiate the gods for various ends will never gain freedom. So is there anything wrong with about rituals, religious rituals and practice, and all kinds of sadhanas which are based on action? So there is nothing wrong about any of those religious activities, or spiritual activities. But those religious, spiritual activities, they don't bring about self-knowledge. So without self-knowledge, a person who studies the scriptures and practices rituals to propitiate the gods. So the verse refers to the Vedic scriptures, the scriptures on karma and dharma, the scriptures that suggest us that we take actions with a certain manner, a certain attitude, and certain dharmic action, and we do certain rituals and certain sadhanas, and even sadhanas and rituals to propitiate the gods. And the ends may be all kinds of various ends, as it says. So we may want some material punya, we may want spiritual punya, but yet we are bargaining with God. We are presenting our actions, we are doing our rituals, we are doing our sadhanas because we want something. So action is going to produce something. But the person without self-knowledge who does all of that will never gain freedom. So there is a nice implication in this verse, is that it says self-knowledge in the beginning and freedom in the end. So self-knowledge, in a way, is the beginning of moksha, is the beginning of freedom. Freedom is the full fructification of self-knowledge. Self-knowledge, in a way, is the beginning of this process that brings us to moksha, that ends in moksha. Okay, so what is self-knowledge? Is the clear, firm, and directly understand that I am consciousness, and as consciousness, I am pure and I am limitless, and I am beyond time, space, and so on. So I'm free. free consciousness. So this knowledge, when it's direct and it's firm, is the base of one's road, let's say, into moksha, because from there you go into the process of neutralization of those bits and pieces of remainings of ignorance, because there is a lot of ignorance that survives self-knowledge. So we go about neutralizing or canceling those ignorance, and that is a gradual process. It's a process that takes a little time. That's why sometimes Ramji presents this traditional formula of the 5, 10, and 15. So because freedom, which means to say the cancellation or neutralization of all ignorance-based vasanas, it requires, usually it takes some time. It's a more gradual phenomenon, okay? But it begins with self-knowledge. So without self-knowledge, a person who studies the scriptures and practices rituals to propitiate, to gain punya for various ends, will never gain freedom. Freedom begins with self-knowledge, and a person who does rituals will never get freedom. But as we know, actions are as good, we could say, actions as good as contemplation and knowledge. Why? We know that without knowledge, actions can never produce moksha or freedom. Action can never produce self-knowledge and moksha. Yeah? But without proper spiritual actions, I never develop the mindset, the mind purification, the mind refinement that allows me to do my inquiry, my contemplation, and gain my self-knowledge. So what is more important, action or knowledge or contemplation? So of course, both are very, very important, because you can never get self-knowledge without preparing the mind. But on the other hand, we don't want to waste our time, our life, preparing the mind until we have a perfect, refined, purified mind, if we don't take that mind into contemplation, following the logic as presented by the scriptures, right? So this verse distinguishes religious ritual and dharmic actions from knowledge. So all kinds of dharmic actions, spiritual actions, all kinds of sadhanas based on actions, all kinds of spiritual, religious rituals, all of them, they have to be distinguished by inquiry, by self-inquiry and knowledge, because they are like, they are two paths that never meet, okay? One path produces mental preparatedness, and the other produce understanding, knowledge, okay? So they don't really mean, it's not that by doing actions, one day you come and you have the knowledge. There is this confusion in the spiritual world that says, no, there are some people that get self-knowledge as a bhakta, as a devotional, emotional person, because it has so much love and does so many pujas and rituals and so on. And then this person has so much love that they gain knowledge. So no, all of that puja, all of those spiritual religious rituals serve the purpose to prepare the mind to cancel the sense of ownership, and doership of the ego. The ego is going to become more and more pure and humble and resolved, and the desires and the vasanas are going to be shrinking and drying. And one is bringing Ishvara into account, into the equation, is relaxing in respect to what's coming tomorrow, what's going to be my destiny, because one understands the relationship with Ishvara. So all of that is going to prepare the mind. But one will never get this knowledge without inquiring into the nature of consciousness, and preferably following the logic as presented by the Upanishads. You can try to do like in the intuitive way, like some people like to believe that it's easy to do. You just say, like, yes, I am the self, and what is the self, and who am I, what am I? Those notions that we found, you know, from Ramana. Ramana was propagating this notion, this simple, you know, kind of inquiry into the nature of consciousness by inquiring into the nature of the mind. What's the mind? Who am I? What is this light behind the mind? And so on. So we say that this knowledge is much more easily gained and retained by following the logic as presented in the Upanishads, because the Upanishads does not leave you there in the abstract world of vagueness and say, who am I? No, no. It's going to present the logic that's going to prove to the mind that the mind is not separate from consciousness. And the nature of the individual mind is consciousness. So this verse distinguishes religious rituals and all kinds of sadhanas based on actions from inquiry and knowledge. But we are told that none of these actions will produce the knowledge that will free us from ignorance. So when we talk about moksha, we talk about freedom. Freedom from what? It's freedom from, most of us, we want freedom from suffering. But then as we get into Vedanta, we understand that suffering is a byproduct of ignorance. And then we say, oh, now I got it. The only way to remove suffering is by removing ignorance. I cannot remove suffering without touching my ignorance. I need to approach, address my ignorance and remove the root cause of my suffering, which is ignorance. So none of these things will produce the knowledge that will free us from ignorance and its byproduct, meaning and its cause, but ignorance and its byproduct, which is suffering. Only the knowledge I am the self will take care of that problem. But we need to emphasize the value of proper action as a means to refine and prepare the mind for self-knowledge. So we should never lose sight of that. Okay? Actions are very important. The only problem is to believe that action can produce moksha and freedom. But action is almost as important to inquiry, to investigation and inquiry into the nature of consciousness and the nature of the mind, knowledge. The Sanskrit text declares that actions performed over countless billions of years are useless to one who desires freedom. But this is a very interesting statement. The Sanskrit text declares that actions performed over countless billions of years, just imagine, millions of lives, billions of lives, and we are there doing actions, and all the compound, all the totality of those actions will never sum up to produce freedom or moksha and self-knowledge. So is that really so? Can we say that they are completely useless? Can we say that they are completely useless to one who desires freedom? So I would say yes and no. It's useless in the sense that actions will never do the job. But no, in the sense that as a Vedantine, we do actions with the Karma Yoga spirit, aiming to prepare the mind for freedom. Let me see. Let me change it here because let me repeat this one. The Sanskrit text declares that actions performed over countless billions of years are useless to one who desires freedom. So one who desires freedom understood all actions they can do will never bring about this moksha, this self-knowledge, this freedom. Okay, therefore it is useless. But when he looks back and he looks, oh, I have had billions of lifetimes, billions of actions. Were they really useless? I mean, challenge a little bit this statement, and you'll understand why. No, they were not really useless. They are useless from now on because now I understood. But they have served a purpose. It brought me here. It brought me to the point that I can drop the notion that actions can still provide me with some spiritual refinement or development, because I got the preparation I need, and now I just need to drop the actions. So, but as a Vedanta, we do actions with the Karma Yoga spirit, aiming to prepare the mind for freedom. So what I mean to say is, when we come to Vedanta, we invite to be a Karma Yogi and to be an inquirer. Okay? So as a Karma Yogi, we know that we are doing work to refine and prepare the mind, purify the mind. So we are just refine our equipment, which is indispensable for self-knowledge. Okay? So we have a Karma Yoga attitude, and we know that doing certain proper actions with a proper attitude is going to bring about mental preparation, mental refinement. Okay? We know that actions are not going to give me or to produce self-knowledge and moksha, but it's preparing. But as a Karma Yogi, we are Vedantin as a Karma Yogi once we come to Vedanta. The real Karma Yoga is presented by Vedanta, by the Gita. We are Karma Yogi, but we know that all refinement of mind serves only the purpose of applying knowledge so that I can gain my self-knowledge and moksha. So as a Vedantin, I have two goals. I have an intermediary goal and an ultimate goal. My intermediary goal is mental preparatedness, mental refinement. And my final and ultimate goal is self-knowledge and moksha. And we work at those two goals simultaneously. It's not that you do one thing or the other. We want to have a better and better, more and more refined knowledge so that my knowledge can be better assimilated and retained. Hey, I know what is my intermediary goal, and I know it's my final goal, and I work for those, and there is no conflict between these two. So as a Vedantin, we do actions with the Karma Yoga spirit, aiming to prepare the mind for freedom. Moksha is our final goal, and mental preparatedness is my intermediary goal. So various ends will never gain freedom. This reference to time, never gain freedom, it's a reference to time. We are referring that action will never produce freedom. This reference to time indicates that action and knowledge are like two parallel lines. You know that freedom is a byproduct of self-knowledge. It will never gain, the individual doing billions of actions will never gain moksha or self-knowledge and freedom. Okay, never indicates time, and it indicates that action and knowledge are like two parallel lines that will never meet, no matter how long they are extended. This is a very nice analogy. So they never really meet, as I said before. In the next verse, Shankara says that not even billions of actions will produce self-knowledge. We'll see that. The aim of the verse is not to dissuade people from fulfilling social and religious duties and performing all kinds of sattvic, dharmic actions, okay, or Karma Yoga actions. So the aim of this verse is not to dissuade people from do actions. As we know in the Gita, there are a lot of times that Lord Krishna, understanding the situation of Arjuna, and Arjuna began challenging Krishna in the verse 3. So you kind of confused me. So you told me that knowledge is superior, but now you tell me that action is superior, than knowledge. Huh? So as we have seen, there is a moment, there is a passage there that Krishna emphasized knowledge, action over knowledge, because he understood that for Krishna, it was much better to act rather than avoid action. You need to do actions when the actions are proper. So the aim of this verse is not to dissuade people from doing and fulfilling the social and religious duties and actions and performance and so on. We need to keep doing our good actions. But the aim of this verse is to stress that knowledge, and knowledge alone, is the means to free us from the endless cycle of chasing. That cycle is a cycle referring to life, death, and reincarnation, samsara chakra, no? The cycle of coming back into this world of pleasure and pains and so on. So the verse wants to emphasize that only knowledge alone can free the individual from bondage. The bondage is just a superimposition created by the mind. And then only the knowledge can resolve, or can cancel, can remove that wrong notion, that superimposition. Most probably, some of you have heard Ramana Maharaj said himself that by knowledge alone, the self can be realized. And then he goes to the extent to say, when the self was never realized, the self is all the time realized. He's realized in you and all beings, in all creatures. The self is realized ever, all the time. There is no question of realizing the self, but there is a misconception, a misunderstanding that the self is something other than myself. Therefore, I have to find and realize the self, gain the self, connect to the self. So this misconception, this misunderstanding can only be resolved by the means of understanding, thinking, understanding, clearly, seeing things as they are. Therefore, by knowledge and knowledge alone, the self can be realized.
Hello, Arlindo, can I make a question?
Please.
Hello. It will be good if I can understand better what we mean with knowledge. Can you explain me the difference, for example, no? Because I confuse knowledge with understanding.
Knowledge in this sense here, knowledge is understanding. Understanding, okay. Knowledge.
Okay.
Tagadata Maharaj used to say, understanding is all.
Okay, okay.
Most important. So
it's not only notions, no? With knowledge, we don't mean only notions, no? Only information.
No, there are two things, and the next verb is going to enter into this topic that you are bringing now. It is like, one thing is the logic, the scriptural knowledge, the body of knowledge, the teaching methodology. This is knowledge. It's a knowledge of how reality is. It's a knowledge about the nature of reality, the nature of Shara, the nature of Jiva, the nature of Jag. This is the whole of the spiritual knowledge revealed to us by the Vedas, which includes the Upanishad. Is the total knowledge. And this knowledge is a fact, and it's built into the universe, and it comes as a revealed knowledge through the rishis, through Ishvara, through consciousness, through Ishvara. So this is a knowledge which is a logic based on our unexamined experience that we need to go back and examine it better. And then we follow the logic, and then we get to understand and clear our mind and gradually remove all those misconceptions, okay? So the goal of Vedanta is not Vedanta. The goal of Vedanta is to remove all those wrong notions and to leave us just free from ignorance and knowledge, we can say. You understand?
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
the only knowledge that we want with Vedanta, the only knowledge we want with Vedanta is Aham Brahmasmi. I am consciousness, I am Brahman. And this knowledge requires, or this knowledge, which is a different kind of knowledge, this is what we call direct and immediate knowledge. Okay? This knowledge is not the knowledge of the Vedantic body of knowledge. That has served the purpose only to neutralize our ignorance. When you neutralize your ignorance, knowledge and ignorance just go. You understand? When you have acidity in your stomach and you take something very alkaline, so you ingere, oh, you say, you take in some alkaline substance, and that is going to combine with acidic substance in your stomach, and one is going to cancel the other, and then you are free from both. So when we apply knowledge, this body of knowledge of Vedanta, we are canceling our ignorance so that we can remain after free from knowledge and ignorance, because we don't want to carry Vedanta all through our life. Just imagine the burden to carry Vedanta. You know? So this knowledge is like a mirror. It's a mirror that is going to reveal to you your true nature, your true face. You're going to see yourself as consciousness. Okay? But anyway, when we look into a mirror, we never look in the mirror to see the mirror, right? Who cares about the mirror? We look into the mirror to see if I can find myself again there every morning. Oh, I'm still here. I'm still alive. Oh, how nice, you know? No, we don't look at the mirror for the sake of the mirror. We don't look into Vedanta for the sake of Vedanta. I just want to get this Aham Brahmasmi knowledge clear so that I can enjoy and appreciate the freedom, which is my intrinsic nature. Does it your question, Claude?
Perfectly. Thank you.
Okay. So, knowledge and knowledge alone is the means to free us from ignorance and the endless cycle of birth, life, and death, and reincarnation, and so on. So why should this be so? We only perform action because we desire a particular result, even if our object of desire is God. So we say that knowledge is never going to give us freedom because action always bound us to object. You know? Even if we are doing actions to please God and to gain punya karma. You know? So we only perform action because we desire a particular result. It reminds me of Shimayananda. Did you guys see the movie of Shimayananda, the documentary? Very nice, huh? You remember that piece that Swami Tapovan told Shimaya not to go down to the valleys? Huh? He said, no, don't go down there because down there is a lot of karma and you're going to get caught up with karma. Stay here on the hills, and here there is nothing going on. You don't need to deal with karma. Why? Because when you deal with karma, you are caught up with the results of karma, and then again and again. And when you see, you know that Shimaya used to be so stressful running his organization that sometimes he had to take long vacations so that he would not have some serious heart condition, you know, because his heart was not to its best in the end. It was too intense. You know? So if you want to deal with action, you have to be ready to pay the price. The price is just actions and all the results, and you are caught up in that spin, that of actions and result, action, reaction. Even if we act with a spirit of devotion and detachment, surrendering to a result the results to God, we still remain focused on the phenomenal world, the world of accomplishments and so on. You know? Good spiritual actions, such Vedamic actions, will at the most produce mental purification, but not self-knowledge. For self-knowledge, we need Jnana Yoga, Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. Not the same concept. So what actions is going to, it may produce us a lot of good results, including mental purification, but it will never produce self-knowledge. As long as we remain focused on the phenomenal world of accomplishments and so on, in the world of objects, we must rely on the means of knowledge that allows us to recognize those objects of accomplishment. The means of knowledge for objects of accomplishment is perception and inference. Perception and inference allows us to distinguish one object from another and to assign it a name. In this way, we populate our mind with myriads of objects, each one separate from one another by its properties, name, and form. So what it means to say here, this note, that it sounds a little bit like coming from Dayananda, is that as long as we do actions, we are caught up with the world of objects, of accomplishment, and so on. And for that, we always have to rely on our perception and inference. Okay, so we are doing actions and we rely on our perception and inference, and therefore we're never going to get self-knowledge, because as it was stated and as it was demonstrated in the first verse, so self-knowledge cannot be gained by perception and inference. Self-knowledge is of the nature of direct knowledge. So self-knowledge cannot be gained because the self is not an object of perception or inference. The self is the nature of the knower. It's not an object of knowledge. It cannot be gained by perception and inference. So that's the logic here. Perception and inference allows us to distinguish one object from another. We can get so much knowledge, phenomenal objects, no, scientific knowledge or knowledge of all a plurality of names and forms. But it will never provide us or conduce us to self-knowledge. So recall that the verse number 1, we were told that perception and inference is of no use for realize one's true nature. One's true nature, the nature of our true self as limitless joy and satisfaction. So for that, perception is useless. For such realization, directly knowledge alone suffices. And knowledge comes to us through the enfoldment of the scriptures, declarations, with the help or by a competent teacher. So for this realization, as we know, this realization of the self, which is a direct knowledge realization, this direct knowledge alone suffices. And this knowledge comes to us through the scriptural knowledge. The logic presented by the scriptures with the help of a competent teacher, a teacher who can help us to understand the meaning of those statements, Upanishadic statements. In the case of this text, the statement that the whole text of Vivekachudamani goes around this declaration, this Mahavakya, that you are that, Tat Bhamasi. So in this case, in the case of this text, Tat Bhamasi, you are that, you refers to the individual, and that refers to the totality. Self-knowledge is not like object knowledge. Why? Because the self is not an object of knowledge. So self-knowledge is not objective knowledge. It's a total different nature. So it's not something that I can know outside of my own self-conscious existence. So it's myself recognize my own conscious existence, conscious, limitless existence. So it's not something that they can see, sense, scrutinize, and get to understand through the mind and the sense. No, it's a direct knowledge. Self-knowledge is unlike every and all object knowledge. We may conceive self-knowledge as the joining of two separate things. In this text, Shankara presents the individual and the self. The self, a lot of the time, is present as a totality. It presents the individual and the totality. So we may conceive of self-knowledge as a join of two separate things, the individual and the totality. So he presents the self as the totality. Then we have the totality, we have the individual, and then we can join the individual and the totality. But this is not the case. This is not self-knowledge. Self-knowledge is not knowing the totality plus the individual. We will never know the totality because the totality is too vast for the jiva to know. Ishvara is all-knowing, but we'll never know the totality. So self-knowledge is not the knowledge of the totality of the manifest plus the totality knowledge of the jiva. No, the individual and the totality are not compounded to become the self. We cannot get, okay, let me get the totality of the universe we call Ishvara. We get the totality, and then I join myself with Ishvara, and then I have self-knowledge, because self-knowledge is the knowledge compounded by the jiva and the totality. The individual and the totality are not compounded to become the self. The very conception, the self here we could say the reality or the totality, the self, so it's just a compound. The very conception of the distinctness between the individual, the total, and the self. So now I add the third element to make it a better, to provide a better understanding. The very conception of distinctness between the individual jiva, the totality, the total, and the self is the definition of ignorance. Ignorance is to break, to separate, to make distinction. It make the object as made out of, make the self as made out of a totality of parts, So this is the very nature of, the very definition of ignorance. So there is no action that can compound, bring the parts together to make the self. The self is not a totality of the parts. As we say often, the self is partless. So it's a partless whole. It's whole because there is only consciousness, there is only awareness, the self. But it's not a whole, it's not a totality made out of parts. It's a partless whole. So it belongs all together to a different kind of order of reality in which the names and forms and parts, they do not really exist because it's not real. The self is what we call satya, that what is the reality of everything, every appearing thing. So the very conception of distinctness between the individual, the total, and the self is the definition of ignorance. So there is no action that can join these three things, because these three aspects have never been separate. So when I say the self in reference to the total and the individual and the self, so the self is the substratum of the entire universe, which includes the individual. So the essence, the substratum of the individual jiva, Ishvara, as the totality, you understand? The substratum, the space, holding those three different factors in this universe, which is Ishvara, Jiva, and Jagat, which is Ishvara in the form of the universe, manifests as the universe. The substratum is the self. So none of these factors are separate from the self, because the self pervades everything. Is that which is always pervading and sustaining everything. The same way space accommodates and holds everything without being touched or affected. So the self, our fundamental free nature, independent free nature, is the substratum of these other factors of the totality and of the jiva. So there is no question of bringing those factors together, because they are not separate from the self. As actions can only produce more actions in the world of multiple objects, which we know through perception and inference, it's obvious incapable. So actions obviously are incapable of leading us to a realization of the self. For this knowledge, we require a means other than perception and inference and action based on perceptions. For this knowledge of the self, we need another means other than perception and inference. And this other means is Vedanta, the Upanishads. Action can only produce more actions in the world of multiplicity of names and forms, objects, which we know through perception and inference. And it's obvious that perception and inference are not capable of leading us to the realization of the self. For this knowledge, we require a means other than perception, inference, and action based on perception. Vedanta is this means. Vedanta is the only means of knowledge, meaning to say knowledge, self-inquiry is the only means of knowledge, because the only way you can know, your true fundamental nature is by removing your ignorance. And the only thing that removes ignorance or cancels ignorance is knowledge. And this knowledge is beautifully, elegantly, sophisticatedly presented in the scriptures of the Upanishads, what we call our Jnana Yoga, our Vedantic Jnana Yoga. Any questions? Verse number 5. Millions of actions will not produce self-knowledge. Actions can purify the mind for gaining self-knowledge. So it's a repetition here. This verse may strike us as redundant. We have already been told that actions do not result in knowledge. But why the Vedanta scriptures are so repetitive? I mean, Ramji tends to eliminate as much repetition as possible. But we have all these repetitions because ignorance is so deeply hardwired, is so persistent, that we need to again and again look into it, okay? To understand, for example, in this context, why action will never do this job, why only knowledge, understanding will do it. If we hear it one time, we say, yes, makes sense, but when you find yourself, you're again doing action, hoping that you can get rid of your fundamental existential problem. Okay? So it's very, very deeply ingrained in our minds, We have already been told that actions do not result in knowledge. Why is this being repeated? Because the distinction between action and knowledge must be understood. It must be clearly understood if Vedanta is to work. The most common thing I find is people giving it a try to Vedanta, And then after some time, they are not too convinced to begin with about this talk of knowledge, you know. People like knowledge, ooh, this is strange, this knowledge thing, it seems to be not really spiritual, but mental. It's intellectual, it's mental, it's theoretical, you know. I had someone that I got to, I was friendly with this guy when I first met Vedanta, and he was a guru, and he was from the world of experiential world of enlightenment and all this feel good stuff, and this energy and this love thing and and this hugging and so on. And when I got into Vedanta, I started walking away, distancing myself from this guy, from this friend. And he used to ask me when he had some more close and intimate time with me, he said, "But tell me a little bit better. What do you mean by knowledge? What is this knowledge thing? What do you exactly like Claudia was asking? You know, what is this knowledge thing? You know?" And then I would explain again. I would say, I mean, people call it self-knowledge. I would tell him, you know? They don't call self-experience, because every experience has a beginning, a middle, and end. When you go to the scriptures, they say the scriptures on enlightenment means self-knowledge. You know, even Ramana Maharaj, which is your idol, said that it's about knowledge. But he would scratch his head and say, but knowledge? What is this knowledge, you know? Knowledge of what? I always thought that the real thing is to experience an empty mind. And I mean, how can you have an empty mind and knowledge at the same time, you know? No, I don't want to just have no knowledge, nothing. It's the old notion that has survived, has existed forever, that says that enlightenment is a state, it's a mental state of no thoughts, an empty mind, nothingness. So if you have an empty mind with no thoughts, no concepts, nothing is in there, and then you have removed the world. When you remove the world, and then you feel peaceful because there are no thoughts bothering you. The people believe that the problem are thoughts. But the problem are not thoughts. The problems are stupid, ignorance, self-limiting, self-insulting thoughts. So we want to neutralize or cancel those thoughts, replacing them with, bringing other thoughts that are going to cancel the previous thoughts and leave you just in your true nature, you know, as I'm just the light that reveals knowledge and ignorance. I'm not attached to knowledge, I'm not attached to ignorance, okay? But I have the knowledge in respect, in regards to my true nature. That's the only knowledge that counts. Yeah? The only knowledge that counts is to know what and who I am in my true fundamental nature. So we understand that knowledge is what we want to go for when we come to Vedanta. But this ignorance that tells us, oh, but, you know, maybe the real thing is to have an experience. Another way to look into knowledge and action is to compare it to knowledge and experience, you know. So action, because action is conducive to an experience. Contemplation is conducive to knowledge, understanding. People are much more inclined to do actions because actions bring about an experience. So when you tell them the experience are never going to solve your problem because there is no experience that stays forever. So only knowledge, and then they say, but knowledge, and knowledge of what, you know? The experience of not thinking is so good. Why I want to bring knowledge into the equation? No, because you need to bring knowledge to cancel your ignorance so that you can live happily in spite of the world and the thoughts of the world. This distinction between knowledge and experience, knowledge and action, is a big one. It must be understood if Vedanta is to work. So crucial, so fundamental is this distinction that Shankara decides to repeat it over and over again. The verse also emphasizes the value of action as a preparation for self-inquiry. Millions of actions will not produce self-knowledge. Actions can purify the mind, though. Purify and prepare the mind for gaining self-knowledge. So now we're talking. Now the verse 5 is just giving some value to actions as well. Yeah? So the verse also emphasizes the value of action as a preparation for self-inquiry. Action purifies the mind. The action referred to is that which is prescribed by karma, dharma, yoga, yeah? And all the spiritual, religious activities that provide us with spiritual growth and so on, meditation and all kinds of sadhanas that are based on action, experience, and so on. Yeah? Meditation, when we talk in terms of Vedanta, meditation to us is contemplation. It's not like producing an empty mind. When we go to the yoga, we want meditation as a means to empty the mind of all sorts so that we can have a very, very reflective mind and start enjoying the bliss and the peace and the love that is just a reflection of our true nature, you know. But as Vedantins, we don't really stimulate much that, although in some of our scriptures here and there, and in the Gita, in chapter 6, we present a meditation as a means to also improve the mind, okay? But fundamentally, meditation for us in Nididhyasana is to bring the mind into how you say, it's hold the mind into a flow of thoughts all around those statements, those teachings of the Upanishads. You just keep contemplate on that flow of inquiry, of thoughts, you know, and so on. So you stimulate the mind, but in a very subtle manner, just going through the teachings and getting it really clear and firm and solid in your mind until you understand Ham Brahmasmi, you know. You just dwelling, the word I was looking, you just dwell into the teachings in a so subtle way, and you can do it in a meditative position. Okay, so just you don't have any distraction, you just do it, and then you just bring this flow of Vedantic thoughts and words into your mind, and you do your nididhyasa, dwelling into teachings of Vedanta, dwelling into the self. The self is the best. The teachings of Vedanta are the best symbols for representation, best representation of the self. So we are not against good actions, spiritual action, dharmic action, sattvic actions. Life needs to be acted out. People who want to prematurely escape the world because they don't want to deal with their prarabdha karma, and they want to just go to the ashram, go to the forest, go to a monastery or something like that, you know. Big mistake. Because unless you have really worked your karmas, your mind is not going to be settled enough so that you can retire to an ashram and keep dwelling into this scriptural knowledge 24/7. It's hard to do that when the mind is not really prepared. So, and then the other, I mean, we're going to see, I know we don't see it in here, maybe a little bit later, we're going to see that there are two lifestyles. One is the sannyasa, which is someone who renounce the world and say, no, I have no attraction to the world. I don't want to get engaged with family, business, and children, and properties, and companies, and none of that. And I have my mind is red, and I just want to contemplate on this Vedantic knowledge. But those are very rare individuals that have that kind of punya, spiritual punya, the ultimate punya. So most of us, we need to take advantage of our rajasic nature and do proper actions, because it's through actions that we purify, we polish our minds through actions. Understand? It's the actions with a certain attitude, a certain understanding, a certain knowledge, guided by good actions, actions driven by knowledge, not by ignorance. What is ignorance-based action? Is the action that says, oh, yes, I'm small, I'm incomplete, I'm inadequate, I'm insufficient, and I need to do this and this and this to gain that and that and that, so that I may feel a little bit okay about myself. So those are ignorance-based actions that push us around and so on. But what is knowledge-based actions? Well, knowledge-based actions are totally different nature. Everything belongs to Ishvara. I'm just an instrument of the Lord. I act with a spirit of gratitude, okay, and contribution and retribution. I see the beauty in the world, and I see the world as Ishvara, and my actions are just devoted to Ishvara with this spirit, and then I enjoy my actions. They are nothing to themselves. I don't care for the results. And I keep growing, and my goal is just to refine my mind through actions, through actions, through actions. So if we avoid actions, people go to these ashrams and then they don't have a field of action, and then they are caught up in an impossible situation. They cannot walk away from the ashram. When you go to one of those ashrams and become a sannyasi, you have to give away all your money, all your belongings, all your properties. And just imagine the situation. Then after 1 year, you just scratch your mind. Ooh, it was a mistake. I was not ready for this one. You have to really be thoughtful about that, careful. So, because without this field of action, I cannot even develop my mental purification, refinement. I cannot grow spiritually. I don't have the field for my actions, because in the ashram, I only have a space for my Jnana Yoga, contemplation, listening to the scriptural knowledge and contemplating, writing my notes, and then again and again, just imagine. And I don't need it. I need action so that I can grow. And you don't have the field of action. So action is important. Is the means by which we grow, we purify, we refine the mind. These actions help to purify the mind by turning us away from self-gratification. Spiritual actions, they are actions that are going to diminish this self-centered ego who wants everything for himself and herself. It's going to really make it a beautiful, good ego, mature and sattvic ego. The purification of the mind that right actions produce is a lessening of our attachment to the sensual, emotional, and intellectual satisfactions that tend to feed our sense of individuality. All this sense of I and mine, what I want, what I don't want, it keeps feeding the ego. Ego is the sense of I, this identity, the sense of individuality, that I and mine, this is the ego. The more we act out with that spirit, of I and mine, and I do things because I'm attached to my sensual, emotional objects of satisfaction, I will be feeding the sense of individuality. But when I turn my actions with a spirit of devotion, gratitude, and dedication to the Lord, giving more and taking less, contributing, concerned more about contributing than about gaining. And then this sense, this egocentric sense of individuality gradually start, disappearing or shrinking or melting away. the I like, I want, I must have, I need it, all those thoughts. These thoughts drive us towards objects and away from the knowledge, of my fullness and my joy and satisfaction as consciousness awareness. So all these ignorance-based thoughts drives us and feeds a sense of individuality, this egocentric small self, ultimate. When we have sufficiently neutralized our likes and dislikes, we will be capable of the emotional balance and strengths which are essential for self-inquiry. So this is a nice sentence. When we have sufficiently neutralized our likes and dislikes, so it means to say we need to do the work of good karma yogi, acting with a certain knowledge, understand, and then with a certain attitude in a timely manner, and with a spirit of dedication and contribution and so on. In that way, my likes and dislikes, they are not going to be fed. I'm not acting out to gain what I want. I'm acting out because I want to contribute, okay? And I want to gain something, but what I want to gain here? I want to gain a spiritual elevation, a spiritual growth, that's my main goal. I understood that I may have any and everything the world may offer me, but if I don't have spiritual maturity, spiritual elevation, spiritual purity, my mind is going to be disturbed. And with a disturbed mind, I will never really enjoy even the greatest richness and luxuries the world can provide me. I will never going to enjoy it because my mind is disturbed. The mind is our primary instrument to be an enjoyer. So as a karma yoga, I understood that, and I want to work for mental purification. So therefore, I want, I must have, all those thoughts driven by ignorance are going to take me away from the realization of my true nature as fullness, because I'm declaring I'm not full, I'm incomplete, I'm inadequate, therefore give me this, give me that, I want this, I want that. When I have sufficiently neutralized my likes and dislikes, so neutralization of my likes and dislikes, my ragas and dveshas, is essential, is fundamental to tranquil the mind, to get mental balance, equilibrium, so that I can enter into my Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana. Everything has its place. So we said disturbed mind. Disturbed by what? By what I wanted, what I don't want. I'm all the time agitated because I have this binding desires and aversions, extroverting me, making me all the time running around. So if I have my likes and dislikes, really populating my mind, I would never be able to do this work. And even if I gain some of this knowledge, the knowledge is not properly retained, because the mind that's like that, when your mind is like that, even if you have to go to the school to learn some basic mathematics, but if the kid has a mind like that, he cannot retain the knowledge. He may understand a little bit in the classroom, but the mind is so agitated, it does not hold the knowledge, does not assimilate the knowledge. So the mind has to be calm, not only to gain the knowledge, to receive the knowledge, but to be able to retain the knowledge. Therefore, neutralizations of likes and dislikes is essential, is the first step. Without this, we are not going to be having this emotional balance, this emotional mental strength, this emotional mental unity as well, which are essential for self-inquiry. For self-inquiry, we need a good mind. And for a good mind, we need karma yoga. It's simple. This inquiry analyzes the words of Vedanta based on our unexamined experience. So this self-inquiry analyzes the words of Vedanta based on our unexamined or not properly examined experience, because none of this is absolutely foreigner to us. All this logic presented by Vedanta is all of them, we'll see. I mean, when we say the most basic logic presented by Vedanta to us is, hey, there is no happiness and joy intrinsically on any object. In objects, they don't possess any happiness. So when we hear that for the first time, we are a little bit shocked. And then when we follow the logic, we re-examine our own experience and say, oh, wow, I mean, it makes sense. Because many times I got what I wanted, but then later on, that object was no longer giving me satisfaction. Therefore, that object was not really the source of joy and happiness, because otherwise I would have had my happiness forever, since I had my object of desire and then I was keeping it. It was enough to keep. I fell in love when I was young. I got my beautiful girl or boy, and then I had so much love. The love was coming from my boyfriend or my girlfriend. All I need to do is to keep it for the rest of my life, and that I have my source of happiness available to me 24/7. But no, very soon we understand, no, it was not in the other. There is something else that we could attribute as the source of happiness. So we understand this only when we truly and clearly and carefully we re-examine our experience following the logic of all these Vedantic teachings, analysis. So this self-inquiry analysis the words of Vedanta based on our unexamined experience, but the words are just a means. The words of Vedanta are not an end. That goes in connection with Claudio's question earlier today. But the words are a means to self-knowledge. No? The words are a means to this revelation, not an end. A means that in due time brings about direct understanding, direct self-knowledge. Self-knowledge is direct. Why it is direct? Because there is no two in self-knowledge. Any other knowledge refers to the knower and the known. If I want to know anything, it's me and the object of knowledge. So there is duality. There is two. No? So it's never really direct because it's in reference to something other than myself. So what's the only direct knowledge? Is the knowledge, hey, I exist. I am, I exist. Okay? So it's so self-evident, so obvious that I exist and I am conscious. And I don't need any validation from any other source because my conscious existence is self-evident. So it's a knowledge that is not in reference to anything other than the knower. Okay? It's not the knower knowing anything other than itself. So this is the only direct knowledge there is. It's direct, it's immediate, and once it's seen, it's perceived, it's gained, you know, then it's recognized as well as the most simple thing. Then one is going to really think like, how could I have missed it for so long? I was looking for myself. How could I be looking for myself? It's the most hilarious thing, as we know. Direct understand. The inquiry, this self-inquiry is about the self. In analogy, the words of the scriptures are like a mirror in which we can see the non-dual self. So in analogy, the scriptural knowledge, there is an analogy that says that Vedanta is a mirror composed by worlds and concepts, all of them based on our unexamined experience of life. These concepts are going to show to you and reflect to you your true nature. So this is a nice analogy. Another analogy is that this is the knowledge is going to be present to you, and to the extent that you take in this knowledge, you submit, you let this knowledge run through your system, it somehow it cancels your ignorance and leaves you free from knowledge and ignorance. You understand? It's like those antacids that they just react to. Yeah? The alkaline aspect of substance combines with the acid, and then it neutralizes, it leaves us neutral. So this is another analogy of knowledge, of this Vedantic knowledge. So in this analogy, the words of the scripture are like a mirror in which we can see the non-dual self reflected, the non-dual self, because when you go and you see yourself, you are not seeing something other than yourself. You see yourself as the self. You have to be careful when we use language. We are very careful with the usage of language. We can never use the self on the third person singular, you know. You have to be very careful. A lot of the time in the spiritual world, when we start seeking for the self, we use the self as the third singular person. Say, oh, the self, the self. We never use as the first person, you know? Singular. I, the self. Not here, I am the self. No, I, the self. So these words are going to reflect to me the self, the only self, the non-dual self, as myself, because there is no myself or yourself or themselves. There is only one self, shining in every creature, in every living being. The self, somehow, it pervades the subtle bodies of all these creatures, and the subtle body of this creature, they shine with sentience, these living beings. But it's all due to the self-luminous self, non-dual self. The inquiry, the self-inquiry is being made by the self for the purpose of realizing its own nature. Why you say that this inquiry is being made by the self? Because there is only one self. The nature of reality is non-duality. There is only one I, there is only one self. There is only one being, one existence. Its existence apparently in this realm of called Mithya apparently forgot its true natures as a jiva, and then it seeks and searches to regain this knowledge, understand in respect to its true fundamental nature as wholeness, and completion. This inquiry is being made by the self and for the purpose of realizing its true nature, which has become obscured by its misidentification with objects. So why this misidentification with objects come into place? For that we blame Mr. Maya. So we have brought Maya so that somebody can be blamed, right? Maya is this power that somehow projects duality and makes the self appear as the jiva and try to complete itself by the means of contacting and associating with objects of all kinds. We are already the self, so we need to do nothing to become the self. We know that. This is why action cannot help us. But inquiry, self-knowledge comes about. Sometimes I like to say that self-knowledge is a direct and immediate knowledge. but it comes about by an indirect way. Why? You cannot produce self-knowledge direct, because self-knowledge, the self is always present, okay? Self-realization cannot be produced, like Ramana Maharaj say, because there is no moment that the self is not realized. Okay? So you cannot do it directly, because nothing we can do can provide us with that which we already possess, we already have, we already are. So it can be gained indirectly, indirectly meaning to say by the means of removal of ignorance. So it is a direct knowledge, but it has to be gained indirectly, because the only way to appreciate and enjoy this fact is by removing our self-ignorance. Understand? We are already the self, so we need to do nothing to become the self, except to remove our ignorance, which is done by the means of inquiry, contemplation, and knowledge. So this is why action cannot help us in this inquiry. But we are so acclimated to action that we need to be reminded again and again that ignorance, the source of our unhappiness, can only be removed by the means of knowledge. So we need to be reminded. We not only we need to be reminded, we need to think about that, and we put it to the test and then realize it again and again until it's so clear that we develop this passion, how you say, this distaste, we say distaste? Yeah, a distaste to experience, you know? Not that one is against experience, because life is experience. Experience and knowledge is a byproduct of living, because you are always in contact with the field of objects and experience. But a distaste to experience as a means to satisfy yourself. You understand? It's very interesting. It's until we develop that, you see, like, okay, you know, the world is beautiful, but you know, I don't need it anymore. I don't need it. So I now understand that the only real true source of happiness, joy, and satisfaction is my own self. So it's my own nature as conscious existence. That's why we love our life so much. We love ourselves like anything else, huh? There's nothing we love more than our life, our existence, our conscious existence. We do anything to live forever if we could. So because we are that source of happiness, we are that source of joy, you know. So we need to understand that until it's so clear that we start looking like a little bit weird to the other people. You know, say, oh, why Lini is not going to the pubs anymore, and Ruth is not, you know, still going to all those trips that she used to do and so on, because we are getting smarter, we are getting wiser. Okay? So we have come to the verse number 6 next week. next week, Vidya will be back with us, Ishwara Willing. And if nobody has anything to say or any contribution, we can close our class of today.
Thank you, Orlando.
Thank you. I'm glad we had 6 of us today. We have Anutosh. Hello, Anutosh.
Hello, sir. Thank you.
It's good to have you back again.
Okay, right. Good night. Thank you.
Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnameva Vashishate Om Shanti Shanti. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
See you next time.
God bless.
And thank you all for your donations as well. They are so appreciated and they are very helpful as well. Huh? So that's
Thank you.
fine. Thank you. Bye bye, everybody.
Bye bye.
God bless.